and welcome to a new talk in the new spatial storytelling track for FMX. I'm joined today by Agnes Bakk. We got in touch through David Gotchfeld, who's also been a part of the FMX spatial storytelling track this year, and I've been very impressed by her work, which I think is very relevant to the topic we have this year, of trying to find new ways for emerging technology to push story and narrative in exciting new directions. This one, I'd say, from quite a different angle from some of the other speakers. So excited to dive in. Hello, Agnes. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for the very kind introductory words. I hope that we can come up with something that's also useful for the audiences.
Absolutely. So why don't you start by introducing yourself and helping us get to know you a little better?
Yeah. So hello everyone. My name is Agnes Bakk. I'm based in Budapest at Moholy-Nagy University of Art and Design. I'm the lead researcher of the Future Care Lab. And within the Future Care Lab, together with my highly appreciated colleagues and also with external collaborators, we are working on several health and design related projects that also sometimes incorporate artistic adventures. And we aim to find ways how to help people who are more medically vulnerable. So basically, that's it. And how I ended up here, that's a completely different story because I'm coming from humanities. I graduated Hungarian and Finnish and theater studies back in Romania, from where I'm originally from. And then I moved to Hungary to study more theater studies. And then I was just enough with studying, and I thought like cultural management is something that I'm very much interested. And I was lucky enough to work in various types of institutions, and that's kind of like like in the old time stories, it kind of like folded my way into like going into this direction where I'm currently. I've worked with many artists, but also filmmakers and performers, and with cultural policymakers as well. And then I found myself like, maybe I need a PhD. So I applied to this university's PhD program, which is actually a cultural design studies or design culture studies program. And there I started to work more on what is interactivity in theater and how new technologies can be used in theatrical framework to actually change the notion of interactivity. Then I got a junior research fellowship position also in Romania, which was in a film studies department. And that started to make me think like, okay, like how this interactivity and film can be merged together. And answer was VR. VR in 2016-17. So it was the golden age of when we again thought many things about how VR can actually change our audience's perception or our perception of ourselves. And then I had one more moment of this, and I am just telling this all in detail because I think like what is this research project or XR project that I'm going to present today a bit more in detail. It's pretty much related to this as well, because once I was lucky enough to go to London to Wellcome's collection, one famous exhibition which was on the history of magic and magic tricks. And there I had this sense like when we see a magic trick is very much similar when we want to get immersed into a world or into a state. Because you see the magic trick and then you're like, is this real? Is this not real? It's happening like this or that way. And then you end up when you see a magic trick, it's a good magic trick that you don't know how it was done, but it's very good. And you just stay with it like, I don't know how it's done, but I'm completely letting myself to be fooled or something. And I think in some cases, the having good sense of immersion works the same way. How are they doing? Oh, they are now, this is happening to me in VR, or this is what I see in a mixed reality environment. How do they do? Even do I feel a human touch? And then we start to think, but then we just want to feel it like as it is. And I think like this is very similar. So, and I finished my PhD, and in parallel, we had the opportunity to think of a new research project here at Moholy-Nagy University of Art and Design. And there is this urban legend, like you can represent many things in VR, but maybe the beneficial effects of nature are not possible to be represented. And then this is how we started to work together with my colleagues. Here I have to name András Szabó, who's also the creative technologist and overall consultant on many of the research projects, and also my other colleague Borbála Tölgyesi, on how actually nature can be recreated in VR. And what does it mean to recreate nature in VR? Because do we think just graphically, auditory? Auditory is also very immersive. Or do we want to translate the beneficial effects of nature from real world into the VR? And this is where we looked at theories that are actually interpreting nature. And there is Kaplan's art theory, which is attention restoration theory, which says that if we go out into nature and we do etc. things, then our attention is restoring and we can kind of like calm down. I'm sure that you also know that, Alex. Even
This
if
is why I
you,
take my dog for a walk every morning. Absolutely.
I just wanted to say that like, being with your dog plus being in nature, that's a beneficial start of the day. So, and that's actually has a beneficial effect. So how to recreate that in VR. And that was the first prototype of Sanctuary project that I'm going to discuss today later in detail. But this was my background.
Yeah. Oh, that's a wonderful introduction. And I want to call our audience's attention to a few things you mentioned. You talked about theater, you talked about film, you talked about magic. These are all established mediums, some of which have been around for, thousands of years, that have certain principles of how you use, stagecraft and different methods in order to tell stories. They have very established languages. Virtual reality, still a very new medium. And I'm curious in what ways, even before we get to the focused project of today, that you started to think about drawing from these other existing mediums and thinking about, how do I make this feel like a magic trick? How do I use, the cinematic language? How do I use theater and stagecraft? How do you start to pull from these existing mediums versus where have you found unique opportunities to do something that is only possible in something like virtual reality?
Mm, was it a rhetorical question or?
No, no, no. I'm curious, and we'll get more into detail, of course,
Uh-huh.
with the specific project. But I'm just curious, as you started to have this journey into virtual reality around 2016, so it's been about 10 years. How much did you find yourselves, especially early on, pulling from those existing mediums with their established paradigms versus inventing new things and trying to push the envelope for what this new emerging medium can do really, really well? And I say new, of course, we all know virtual reality's been around for a long time, but as something accessible to consumers with, a lot of access, that's relatively new. So that's what I mean by that.
I see. I don't know. I think it's very hard to invent anything. I don't know what's your opinion. But for me, it was like obviously very handy. Like I had this literary studies, literary criticism studies, like lingo already incorporated when I studied humanities, and then theater was also kind of like handy. So I was relying more on that approach than on the film studies approach because I found that a bit more static or more
Mhm.
speculative in terms of like when we are talking about a spatial and interactive medium, like sure, horror movies have a very strong somatic effect, but actually theater has even a stronger one. Performance art, not to mention, because it's like really like in your skin. So I was really interested actually like how these performance art and maybe also immersive theater in real life can work. Also combined with the magic tricks and this cognitive psychological mechanisms behind the magic tricks what magicians are using. And there are great books about this and
Mhm.
how to merge these two in order to guide the audience attention. I'm a theoretical person. I love these parts. So when to bring it back to VR, that's a different thing because there is the, let's say, the third wall, which is the technology. So like you have the audience, you have the theory, and there is technology like how you can actually frame and make these ideas workable also and interactable for the single user. That's another question. But I think like theater is like really good in like how to create effect and other good or not so good feelings. And that I think that can be pretty much used in VR.
I think that's absolutely true. You mentioned books, and it's always good when we can give out recommendations to people. Stephanie Riggs, another really talented creator in
Yeah.
the XR space, recommended me a book called actually How Magicians Think, which is actually really, really phenomenal for anyone working in XR. Because as Agnes has pointed out, this is an inherently spatial medium, and you don't have the same tricks as like film to use cuts and wide shots and close-ups to guide the eye. With a frame, you really have to direct their attention, and sometimes use sleight of hand and all these other ways to like try to get them to look at something in one way, interpret it a certain way, and you're very intentionally doing something different. So by the way, yeah, feel free to give any book recommendations or anything else as we chat. And then I think we can probably start to. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would actually bring the audience attention to two books. One is what had a very big effect on me. It was Gustav Kunz, who's a psychology researcher, and he wrote many books and papers, scientific papers on how magic tricks are working, how do they create effect, and he also has a very very good book. But I also have to mention that the creator of The Void also wrote a very practical book on how magic can be incorporated into immersive world creation. And actually, that was supposed to be my PhD, but I was never a magician. So I stayed at the theoretical parts, but he actually brought this down to like more practical things. And I would highly suggest that to everyone.
Yes, this book is by Curtis Hickman, and it's called
Yes.
Hyperreality: The Art of Designing Impossible Experiences. I have a copy on my bookshelf behind me. Really, really excellent piece.
Yes, mine too. I also have at home. Thanks for quoting it properly.
Yeah, this is great. Where I think I'm actually going to start trying to compile like a proper book list, and maybe this will be something we can hand off to all the attendees.
Very good idea. I'm very happy to do that. Actually, I was also thinking. So yeah.
Great. All right. Well, let's dive a little bit more into what we're going to be talking about today. And yeah, take it away. If you want to share your screen, if you want to set it up, however you'd like to make your way into this.
Yes. So we were thinking that it would be great to actually show or talk and show a little bit snippets of how Sanctuary will look like. And this is what I prepared for today, because it's still in the final phases of realization. I would not share now any moving image, but maybe some snapshots are happening here, like to see like how we actually plan. But
We love
to
work in progress.
thanks. But to actually go back to where I left. So as I said, we created together with Coda and Soda and my university, Moholy-Nagy, we created a prototype which was ready by 2023 on PCBR. And that was a very highly realistic and aesthetically pleasing looking like natural environment for which we actually organized kind of like testings both with adults diagnosed with ADHD and also neurotypical. Here we also had a university partner collaborating, ELTE from Budapest. And what we actually saw is that spending 10 minutes in this natural environment where you don't have any gamified aim to do, you don't have any reward, but you also have like this multimodal sense, like, okay, it's very engaging, the visuals, but the auditory effects were also very important. We aim to have like Central Eastern European flora and fauna represented there. And we also aim to give like a tactile feedback as much as you can with the controller, like sense for the experiencers when they are touching the grass or when they are touching something. So that those were very important. And we let them to spend 10 minutes in this environment. And at the end, there was a soothing rain. And this is what we aim to see, whether their negative emotions are decreasing or not. And what came out from this test that actually for patients with ADHD, their negative emotions was decreasing. So, and was decreasing more than for neurotypicals, which I just have to mention. And what else happened is actually then we started to think, so what's very important about our university is that we are, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Budapest, but there is Buda and there is Pest, and my university is on Buda side. Nature is not so far from us. So we often got this question, but okay, you created this natural environment, but if you look out on the window, like behind me, then you can see actually natural sites. And that was like, okay, yes, we had a designer question, like how this is actually helping people to experience nature via VR, but who are those who do not have that much access to nature? Therefore, by this and with the coincidence, several professionals from healthcare and especially from mental health care approached us because they read about our project that we developed a kind of like Central and Eastern European nature in Hungary in VR. And that would be so interesting to actually see on patients in hospital care or in care where they have less access to nature. So this is how we actually started to craft the idea that we could actually redesign this project for elderly adults who are long-term hospitalized. They do not have access to nature, and maybe this would actually show the real beneficial effects of why this project would be in VR. VR has this capacity to actually like isolate you, so they could receive an isolation from the hospital environment, so that could be also like a bit of break, and they could also experience the nature. So this is what we were thinking, and we, more than thinking, we were lucky enough to get a huge grant from the Hungarian Agency for Research, Development and Innovation under the Horizon grant. And so our Sanctuary VR Plus project, it's VR Plus because it's for elderly adults, mainly we started the research. We also have a clinical partner from Strasbourg, the Strasbourg University Hospital's Palliative Care Department, and we also have a partner from York University, namely Laura Appel, who was anyway already working on elderly adults in VR. And together with them, we kind of like crafted like, okay, we want to recreate the beneficial effects of nature in VR for elderly adults. But elderly adults, like we often see that technology can be a solution, but do they really consider that it's a solution for them? So this is where we started actually, and where we found our place as a design university. That's why we are creating this, is because we we had a very strong will, and I hope that we kind of could conclude it very strongly that we have a co-design approach. So we also approached, we have several hospital partners, both from also from Hungary, and very nice and very dedicated professionals who are really working with patients and with VR. Here I have to name the geriatry department and Miss Patricia Laiko, but also the rehabilitation department of Semmelweis University, and there I should mention Beata Vasárhelyi, who are our very strong collaborators. And they really believe that VR could be something that could help the elderly adults to have maybe a better feeling in the hospital. So, and together with them and together with our partners, like we kind of like realize like what is the connection between those patients who are more than 2 weeks or like long-termish in hospital. I hope that not many of you have long-term hospitalized experiences, but it's the more one spends time in hospital, the cognitive capacities are decreasing because one is helpless there. Often one can lose their control over what's happening. The medical processes are very complex. They are also very dependent on availabilities and other issues. And therefore, many patients are basically losing their agency, and they start to experience this kind of state, which is described often learned helplessness. I don't know, are you familiar with this term?
I'm not actually. I was hoping, yeah, as we go through, let's define terms. Also, for anyone who isn't familiar, please do also define palliative care, Agnes, for our audience.
Yes. Thank you very much. So palliative care is that care when there are very long-term, uncurable diseases that require continuous treatment, and those patients often go to palliative care, which is not necessarily hospice, but it's just but it's a very long-term. It can be a very long-term treatment care as well, the palliative. And our partner from France, from Strasbourg, they are having patients with very complex palliative care needs. So they really need like constant care there because they are very complex oncological cases. And learned helplessness is this with what happens in long-term hospital care, meaning that very often patients can experience both behavioral, cognitive, and emotional symptoms. Like they will have apathy, they will feel depressed, they will have this sense of losing agency for very clear reasons, and also their cognition is start to shrink because the monotonous life and this very there is not too much, or often there is not too much input, like which is like motivating, or which is what's the how to which is kind of like has a reinvigoration effect. So that's
I
very
see.
that's kind of like this O state, and then patients often lose their willingness to not only to help someone else or to do something for the environment, but also to do something for themselves.
Mm.
And this is a state which is can be measured in some ways with questionnaires. So in psychology, there are many questionnaires, pro and post questionnaires, to order to measure. Obviously, physiological data could be also taken, but we mainly will look at questionnaires, and also we aim to have more qualitative data, both from the patients and also from the caretakers and nurses and health practitioners, to understand whether how this learned helplessness could be tackled. I jump now very much in forward. Anyway, what we did is that we identified that this is a problem that is not necessary for elderly adults, but elderly adults are more often in hospital care, so they might be a target audience who would actually really benefit from it. And then what we did is that we realized that we have actually two target audiences. It's not the right word, sorry, my theater brain always pops in. But target users. So it's not only the patients, and maybe the patients are in some way the secondary target users, but end users, but the professionals are our main users. So it's very hard to implement VR in hospital just by itself, that you bring it to a patient and they will put it on. It's the last thing that a patient would do by themselves. Therefore, like the practitioners and especially the health psychologists could use it to actually like work with the patient's mental health in the hospital. So we, as I mentioned, like we have many collaborations with healthcare and mental health professionals from hospitals. And we defined that we will kind of like organize two types of co-design workshops. And one would focus more on how a natural environment could look like, and the other one like how actually the implementation of virtual reality could be like, that it's efficient and usable by the practitioners. We organized 3 generative co-design workshop series with elderly adult female patients who were elderly enough and who were elderly, and they stayed enough in hospital to actually be considered as being in long-term hospital care. And what did we do? Have you done co-design before?
Co-design, just like building something with others, or what's your
Yeah,
definition
kind
of
of
that?
like what's your definition of co-design? I'm really curious.
Well, the way I typically think of it is not just designing something with other people, but also often there's like different disciplines. So we're like coming at it from different angles. So we have someone who's, more of an engineer, someone who's more of an artist, and then kind of trying to build something together. But tell me what it means for you in this context.
Well, it starts also something similar. It's just like how we have a more broader view on it, like to engage as many stakeholders as it is possible and reasonable into creating, and to represent their needs and their ideas in it and their priorities, in order to create something that's kind of like with their will and it's usable. Obviously, co-design has several levels. There is like only the user-centered design, when like you create and from time to time you show the project or the product to the possible end users. There is the co-design part where you also identify the problem together with the involved stakeholders, and you start to work together on the possible solution. And I really want to emphasize here the possible solution, because
Mm.
design is like it always aims to tackle complex, messy issues, which is hard to work with only one solution. And there is also the user-generated co-design. Because we are in a clinical setting, this is kind of like a very narrow strand where we can kind of work. So we can do to a certain extent co-design, but then it will shrink because there are very rigorous methods, and we also want to bring it to a randomized control trial into clinical setting. So that's a different universe than designing a health application and testing with 6, 7 possible patients. So we actually organized a workshop of 3 series, and we aim to use generative design tools, meaning that my other colleague, Beata Sosic, she created a kind of like world building terrain for elderly adults where they could like put together their soothing, calming natural environments, but she also used various standpoints of Kevin Lynch. He's urbanist, and his thinking way of how to create an urban setting, but she adapted it into a natural setting. Like what are the crossing points? What are the viewpoints where one would like to stay calm and sit down? And together with the participants, we kind of like created these terrains for various seasons, like also for spring, also for summer, and for autumn. And that was a lot of data for us actually to work together, like, okay, what this nature environment could be. Obviously, we also showed the previous versions of Sanctuary, because by that time we also had from the previous prototype, an available standalone adapted version, which you can find actually on in the App Store. It's downloadable, the previous version, not the current one. I just want to emphasize this. It's called Sanctuary VR. And that's, again, it's a nature environment where it's like a walking simulator with a nature environment with naturalistic sounds. And so we also brought that to the elderly adult participants. And we also had, like, in the beginning, like, workshop where we established like the trust and like that we are here together, and they are also kind of like researchers in this project, because they have the lived experience what we do not have, and we want to incorporate that lived experience as like the primary source for the research. So we are co-researchers in this part. And then later we organize also workshops with professionals where we aim to map like what are their analog methods, like how do they tackle learned helplessness if they identify it with their patients, what are the exercises, what are the how do they approach it basically. And we also aim to map the challenges of accessibility of the challenges of implementation accessible in an accessible way of VR. What does it mean in daily way to use VR in psychological treatments for in hospital? And that starts like, okay, who has to bring in the headset? How do you enter the headset on a hospital Wi-Fi? Is there a Wi-Fi, by the way? Sometimes there is no Wi-Fi. Then, okay, you put the headset on the patient's head. How do you ask the patient what do they see? How do you know that they tell you exactly what you need? Because, come on, there can be many things what they see and they describe differently. How to connect it? Okay, like you have to cast, but if you cast it, then you have to need you have to have a backpack and everything, and you have to just like, like going on an excursion if you want to do it. What happens if you are on a bed? Are you on the bed with the patient? Where do you put the laptop? How do you see? How do you put on the headset? And not to mention, like if one is really conducting research and you want to take physiological data, then that's another level of complexity. Where do you charge the headset? How often do you remember to charge the headset? These are all questions which we tend to forget when we are really focusing on the major goal of like, we want to make their life better, which is fine. It's just like how to innovate also in implementation. So, but yeah, we had all these questions, and then we also asked the professionals to like, we put together concepts, and we asked the professionals to actually like help us to define what is the most meaningful concept. And we had all this material, and then together with my colleagues, the postdoctoral researcher Pálta Szabó, and our other postdoctoral researcher Samuel Hovanec, we kind of like sit together, and especially my colleagues, they sit together and they try to define like, okay, how do we translate this into a virtual reality application? Because like we have all these nice and good ideas. And then they came up with various frameworks, or actually one very good framework how to adapt this, where we also look at we also have an approach from the symptoms. Okay, these are the symptoms that we want to tackle, and these are the elements that we can include into a virtual reality. And this can be visual element, this can be auditory, this can be an interaction. And I forgot to mention, but we did actually a lot of literature research. So we actually scanned many, many, many papers on it, like what's there. And so we also aim very much to have this evidence-based design approach. And then kind of like putting everything in a pot, which I don't want to necessarily mention now because we will have an upcoming paper from this. It's kind of like we created now it looks like a almost 1 hour long virtual reality application that has 6 scenes, and each scene has 6 stations where the patient can interact with the environment.
Is that what we're
Well,
looking at right now, or is this a
yes,
different
yes, yes.
application?
Actually, I was just so immersed into my
Perfect.
screen. Yeah, and this is how it looks. Again, this is not the final version. But we aim to like have these colors and also look at therapeutic garden design to have various colors, various texture types, but also what are the things that are actually inviting the elderly adults to be interactive and to take care of their environment. Therefore, there are scenes from a nature excursion where they can do some activities. But here the challenge was that we are designing it for elderly adults, so accessibility is very, very important. And one major point was like how to design the teleportation. So it's also gaze control, but one also needs like a reassurance button. That's what one wants to do. So it's basically mainly operated with gaze control and with button. And the other issue, what I already mentioned, like what professionals often do not know what the patients see in VR. They can describe, but it's very hard. So our colleagues from Coda and Soda, they actually, so we thought together through and they created an operator's app, which is working on phone or tablet. And just by sharing the hotspot of it, one can it can communicate with the VR headset. And not only that, the professional can see what's happening, but they can also interfere. And very much what's very important, just the breeze from these scenes kind of like attacked me, and I have had the sense of sneezing. So, so what actually can happen that a professional can set like an easy mode or an accessible mode or a normal mode. And in an accessible mode, the patient can just interact in gaze ways with the environment, or the professional can also, by operating on actually on the tool, can also like help them to interact with a possible asset there. But we also incorporated into each scene like kind of like a cut scene, which is something that can bring amazement or awe. Like, for example, a very star shiny sky, or an airplane flying with a small text. And this is very important because it's important that each of the scene can be ended with this like positive feeling, not that the whole scene is not positive. We also had various animals in it, and I'm just mentioning this separately because it was very important for us that animals are important to be in a natural environment, but we do not aim that patients are creating a connection with them. So in each scene, there are like multiple types of animals. And and what's important and why I emphasize this, because actually we plan to have a longitudinal test in Hungary for 3 weeks, and each week 2 sessions, where the patients who can be recruited for this clinical testing, they can experience it twice a week. And we will see how this works out. But we are actually very positive that this might work out well and it can be implemented in psychological treatment. So yeah, so that's our next challenge, actually, to organize the clinical trial.
Love it. I'd like to draw our audience's attention to a few things that Agnes has mentioned in what we're seeing here. Notice that we're not going for a photorealistic style. There's something very painterly. This feels almost like you're inside of artwork, which I think is a really lovely choice. We're seeing different times of day, different lighting conditions, possibly even different weather. We have animals, of course. And then just touching a little bit more on some of the accessibility that Agnes has mentioned. So we're talking about like gaze-based controls where you look at something to activate it versus, you can have controllers. The accessibility question is a really interesting one because oftentimes the two things you have in tension are the level of, I want not quite immersivity, but like the level to which you can really dictate exactly what's happening inside the experience, agency to a certain degree. And then there's something that's a little bit more like holding your hand and trying to make sure you feel comfortable. So in addition to gaze-based versus controller-based interaction, you also can have things like teleportation versus like smooth movement, where you move more directly through the environment, which can be more spatially engaging, but can also be much more likely to make people feel ill and nauseous. And then similarly, the operator app, I think, is a really important touch. And this is something that we've encouraged a lot of our clients to pursue for different projects, because out of the box, a lot of virtual reality experiences will let you cast so you can see what the other person sees. And even that can be a little bit tricky sometimes, because if they aren't activating it properly, you have to, get the headset from them and then like try to do it. But in that casting mode, you don't have any way that you can directly affect the experience. So having a separate operator app that is going to be paired with something like this and actually allows someone who's watching to see what they see to have a conversation about it, to activate different things manually in case they're having trouble with the ways that they can trigger things inside the experience. All of these are really important accessibility considerations, and I'm really glad to hear Agnes talking about these.
Thanks so much for wrapping this together up. You also mentioned. I think like I would just add one more detail, not necessarily to the
Yeah.
accessibility part, but like our audiences might ask like, okay, you designed this app, there is the operator's app, and there, okay, it's accessible, we hear you, but how do you imagine that it will have an effect? So our thinking is that once that the patient experiences interactivity and agency for several times, we think, or our hypothesis is, that it might have a transferring effect to in real life. So our proposition is, or our proposition, I'm just trying to find the right word, which is like
Mm.
enough.
Hypothesis, perhaps? Yeah.
Hypothesis, yes, but like we actually plan to have this effect, and we really hope that we will have this effect, that actually it will help them to be more, to have feel more agency in daily life in hospital care. And also this way, it's not only helping their own health and well-being or mental health, but also like the those who are surrounding them. We really hope that it would be also beneficial for them, because one might also ask like, okay, you design this, it might have a good effect on the well-being or on mental health of elderly adults or long-term hospitalized, but you have to buy a VR headset. You have to, even if we will see how what comes out from this research, you have to have the application, you have to have the time and the attention to actually start to implement this into a treatment plan. But what's the beneficial effect of it? And actually, this can reduce the burden. If we think from the other side, it can reduce the burden, if it works well, the working mechanisms of the healthcare workers as well, because it's a little bit easier to take care of a patient who's like willing to be taken care of, who has the motivation actually to be taken care of, and not like has this very apathic state, which is from long-term hospital care. So this is our plan, that it will work out, and like hopefully in 2 years we will have published results about it.
That's really wonderful. I'd like to hear a little bit briefly as we begin to wrap up about the expectations of how people, where do they begin in the experience? Are you trying to guide them through signposts and through some of the paths to go on a particular journey? Or is the thought that it's very, they have a lot of agency and they can kind of go wherever they want?
Uh, all what I can share is our current thinking of it. So,
Hmm.
because our research article approval is on its way,
Hmm.
so we aim that the professional, mainly the psychologist, can choose which scene to start with.
Hmm.
And that's absolutely whichever ones would like to start with it. For the clinical trial, we might implement one order to with which scenes to start, but actually each scene has its own planned effect. So, like each
Excellent.
scene is like kind of like built up that it can tackle one of the symptoms of learned helplessness. I'm not sure if this is entirely answering your question.
Yeah, just trying to get a sense of how much a user is being guided on a very curated and particular journey versus being told, like, okay, you're in, here's the controls, go explore. Just, yeah, trying to understand that
Mhm.
balance.
That's the plan. Obviously, it always depends on the independence of the particular patient or particular professional as well, and it's also aimed to actually be part of a psychological treatment in that way that the results can be discussed afterwards, and or not the results. That was not the best word maybe, but like the effects of it or the thoughts or the emotions, what it can create in the patient, and that's something that they can discuss. And also the patient has this, like what I mentioned in the beginning, this sense of isolation. So they are isolated from the daily regular hospital environment, and they can experience something else. So it really depends on the patient and on the professionals, kind of like transaction. And the professional is there. So for the research part, we will train those who are contributing, and they will know like how to operate it, and they will know like what would be the protocol. So, and they would, if it is needed, then they can help through the patient to walk through. Currently, there is no signposting and no like click here. Obviously, we use some kind of UX elements in it so one can see what's an interactable asset, but nothing too heavy.
Yeah. Will the weather, the time of day, will those elements be controllable by the operator?
No, 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 no. Currently
Mm.
they all have set which time of the day and which weather is happening there. So that's kind of like fixed.
Yeah, well, it makes sense because I think that's going to have a profound psychological effect. Like any one of these scenes, with rain falling versus dusk or dawn or the middle of the day, I think those are all going to have different, emotions and feelings that they bring up. So yeah, to have each one be very carefully thought out is really fascinating. It's a beautiful project.
Thank you very much. And I think as we wrap up, maybe I can just mention like if those who are interested in more details and more publications on the
Yes.
project, we have a website which is called the Sanctuary, like the title of the application. It's sanctuary.mome.hu. And MOME is my affiliations, Moholy University of Art and Design's abbreviation. So sanctuary.mome.hu is where we aim to publish regularly updates on the project.
Excellent.
And we are
And then,
also looking
good.
for further partners. If anyone is interested, please feel free to reach out to us.
Yeah. And if someone wanted to get in touch with you specifically, Agnes, what's a good way to get a hold of you?
LinkedIn and email are the best. My email address is bakk at mome, as my university's name, .hu. So back at mome.hu. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Agnes. I really enjoyed this discussion and really excited for people to get to experience Sanctuary. Is this something that you think at some point might become a wide release available to the public, or for now, do you see it very much in moderated clinical settings?
Uh, Currently, we see it as a part of a research, as part of the hypothesis. So it's actually as a design project is a physical hypothesis, as in design research we say. But we are really looking forward for the future with wide avenues because this is where we are currently, and we are very curious about its effect. But we are very hopeful.
Yeah, I for one would absolutely love the opportunity to experience this myself, even just from the comfort of my home. And I hope plenty of the world gets the chance to experience this really wonderful piece. So thank you, Agnes, so much for sharing your story, your time, your work here. It's always really lovely to see reality a that has a very clear positive effect on the world. And so this is a wonderful example of that. And I hope to speak to you more soon. And thanks to everyone at FMX for listening to this conversation. And please do reach out to Agnes and her team with any additional questions or thoughts.
Thank you so much, Alex, and I wish to everyone a very nice FMX.
Yes.